Hello and welcome to another episode of the Performance Car Podcast by Motor Magazine. I'm Scott Newman.
And I'm Dylan Campbell.
And today we are in a Porsche 911 Turbo, specifically a 991.2 model. So the Porsche 911 Turbo is powered by a 3.8 litre twin turbo flat six, producing 397 kilowatts and 710 Newton meters, which results in 0 to 100 k's an hour in 3 seconds dead and a 320 kilometre an hour top speed. It's $390,000 roughly as it is, but this one has a few options on it, as you can see here, quite a few options, which brings it to $411,300 before on-road costs. So we're talking big money here. 991.2 means it's the midlife update of the 991 model. So it's a 991 911, which can be a bit confusing, but bear with us. A few changes. You got a little dial on the steering wheel now, which allows you to choose drive mode, sport plus individual or comfort. You get a sport response button in the middle, which primes the drivetrain for maximum response for 20 seconds. Essentially, you hit it and everything goes to maximum attack. You go into the sportiest engine mode and all that sort of thing for overtaking, basically. I don't know, it doesn't give you any more power really, so I don't know why else you'd use it in terms of a push to pass or anything like that.
It goes to the most immediately lowest gear as well.
Yeah, so you press it and it goes wah, and off you go. It's got a dynamic boost function now, which means it holds boost between gear changes. Oh no, sorry, it doesn't. Not only that, if you're on a twisty road and you go full throttle, then off, then back on again, the engine will actually hold its boost pressure. Now it'll keep spinning the turbos, so that when you get back on the throttle, bang, maximum power. The Turbo has half-inch wider wheels, same as which makes them the same size as the Turbo S now, and you get mainly lots of active safety stuff like blind spot monitoring, auto brake. You get the new infotainment, which works very well. But we want to talk about what's under the skin of this car. So let's start with this car, I guess. Dylan, you've been driving around all week. What do you like about the Turbo? What could they do better? That sort of stuff.
Well, the interesting thing I find about this car is it just has such a broad scope of personalities kind of thing. Like, just driving around in it like we are now, it feels very tame and behaved. It certainly doesn't hint at its performance potential.
Rides quite well too.
Yeah, it does.
Comfy.
It's a very comfortable car to drive around in on a daily basis. But press a few buttons, and for me, there aren't many performance cars out there that go from behaved, timid thing to absolute crazy performance car with just the press of a few buttons. And once this car gets its horns out kind of thing, it is so fast and so capable. It's just crazy. It can go from this to this.
We'll get onto the performance in a sec, but let's talk about that. The 911's trump card in many ways. It's day-to-day usability. I mean, you'll notice we don't have Josh with us. It's actually because he's sick, the poor fella, but Porsche was a bit nervous about having him in the back of the 911 anyway, because it's not the roomiest back there. But while it's not designed for adult occupants, I think talking to Porsche and other people, a lot of people who buy this car, the rear seats, even for occasional use, are a real boon, and it's part of this car's breadth of personality. You can use it every day, you can take the kids to school in the back, and you can drive it like a hot hatch or anything, like day-to-day traffic. So it works really well, probably better than most other cars in its segment on that, prosaic level.
Yeah, and the one thing I've noticed driving around in it, like on a daily basis, is that it is a 911, like a hardcore performance 911 that's been made to feel luxurious, as opposed to like a luxury car that has a sporting side, if that sort of makes sense.
Like something like a Mercedes S63 Coupe or something.
Like a Bentley Continental or something like that. At its core, this is a hardcore performance car, and you can still notice that on a day-to-day basis. There's still a little bit of vibration coming through the engine, like when you stop at traffic lights and stuff like that. The ride is really nice, but it still has a tiny little edge to it at times.
It's not plush, it's still firm.
No, you're aware that underneath you is a performance car.
Absolutely. And that's a very smooth segue, intentional or not. The reason we kind of booked this car, I wanted to do the podcast on it, is because the Turbo S model of this car is our reigning Motor Performance Car of the Year champion. So Porsche has basically dominated Performance Car of the Year. You'll often hear us talk about Picotti, so that's Performance Car of the Year. Some unkind observers have sometimes called it Porsche Car of the Year. I've got the figures here. We've held 21 Performance Car of the Years, and Porsche has won 13 of them, so that's fairly dominant. in anyone's language. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that's the case. And there's a hint. There's a slight hint, because it majors on the performance angle. But obviously these are high-end sports cars, and not everyone is lucky enough to be able to have experienced one or to have driven one. So we get it in that for those people that maybe can't stretch to one of these or can't afford one, those have never even driven one, it's hard to just see that result and go, oh, Porsche wins every year, and maybe not cheaper cars. And it's worth touching on, like, as the editor of the magazine, you don't want Porsche to win every year. Like, regardless of the results, it's not a good result for the magazine in that it's like anything. Having the one thing dominate a competition or an event, it isn't good for business in one respect, is it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so you can split performance car of the year into two sort of distinct things. Like from a magazine perspective and from a business perspective, you want a bit of variety with the winners.
You want to go shock winner, or
you want the readers to be flicking through and wondering to themselves, oh, I wonder what's won this year. But having the same manufacturer win many years, like years and years and years, sometimes back to back, it's not good. It's very predictable.
Yeah.
But then from the award perspective, you have to sort of protect the credibility of the award as well. It's performance car of the year, and the best car wins. It is the performance car of the year wins the event.
That's absolutely right. I always say that the only thing worse than a Porsche sort of winning every year, not that it wins every year, but then we've had this dominance, but the only thing worse than that would be not rewarding the award to the best car that year. That would be far worse, you know, for any reason, changing the criteria, or, you know, changing the winner, or giving something else a leg up because it's, you know, it wasn't quite the best, but we wanted a different winner. Like, that's the thing, it's not necessarily our ideal scenario. We want varied winners, but the best car has to win, and the best car is usually a Porsche for the reasons we're about to go into. So what for you is the defining characteristic that, given historically, Porsche has made the best performance car? Why is that the case?
It's very hard to talk about this and give an answer without completely gushing about Porsche and sounding like there's an envelope of cash in the glove box with my name on it. But there's just, when you get into most Porsche sports cars, or pretty much any Porsche sports car on sale today, everything just feels right. It just feels right. You get in it, you're sitting in the perfect position. You don't feel like, you don't think to yourself, oh, I wish the steering wheel was a little bit closer, a little bit higher, a little bit lower. The brake pedal feel just feels really natural and organic and right. The power delivery always just feels really feels really seamless, and like you're hemmed into the car, and it doesn't take long before the car does feel like, it is a cliche, like an extra sensory extension of your body.
It reeks of thorough engineering, doesn't it?
It does. It feels like this giant suit that you wear, kind of thing, like a really nice fitting backpack that you put on. And that just does wonders for your confidence when you go to actually drive the car fast and use its performance. And if you feel really confident driving a fast car fast, you're going to have fun. You're not going to be frightened.
Absolutely. It always seems to do what you want it to.
Absolutely. You never think to yourself, I wonder what this thing is going to do next, which is interesting because the engine's in the boot.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, that's the weird thing, isn't it? It's so thoroughly engineered, yet the inherent engineering principle that guides this car is inherently flawed, because the weight distribution's all up the creek. Although it's interesting that I often think about this car remember when that Nissan Delta Wing thing came out, it looked crazy because it had this massive wide track. But this car is essentially a version of that, because it has very narrow front tyres. I think they're 245s, and on the rear it wears like 305s. So it's all about having, the reason the car feels quite balanced, I think, from what I understand it, is that the contact patch of the tyre is proportionate to the weight distribution. Sure. So that's one of the ways they get around it. Obviously they shuffle it, but essentially I think this car is still like 3862 or something like that. Like, it's a long, long way from the ideal of 50/50, but you do have to drive around that a little bit. Do you find you have to drive around that a little bit still?
You sort of do and you don't. You don't have to as much as you think you do.
No.
If you've not driven a mid-engine Porsche before, or a rear-engine Porsche before, you get in it and you think, oh my God, all the weight is in the middle or the back of this thing. I'm going to have to completely change how I drive, particularly on a racetrack. But you sort of get in and it kind of feels like a normal car, but it does have some quirks to its personality that led on about where all the weight is.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what you've got to be a little bit careful about.
Yeah, I mean, I've only ever driven 991, 911, so it's presumably probably the same. So I've never really experienced that bobbling thing in the nose, and the older Porsches that didn't have that still needed a bit more technique and finesse. I still think it is in the case of this car. Things like the GT3 and things like that especially need a bit of finesse if you really want to get the best out of them. Like they'll go very, very fast, particularly the turbo. They'll go very, very fast of their own accord if you can drive it however you want to drive it. But if you do want to get that last little bit, and I remember when we've both done the Porsche Sport Driving School thing, they do really focus on that brake application to neutralise the weight on corner entry. So there's still definitely a technique to these cars, even though they are dumbed down compared to the Porsches of old.
Yeah, I feel like it would take great skill to get that last like 10 to 5% out of the car, particularly on a racetrack. That's when sort of the amateur drivers are separated from the Warren Luffs of the world kind of thing to extract those final percentage points. From a 911 or any car, really, you've really got to be on it.
I guess for me, to answer the question I put to you was what separates Porsches. Every year we do Bucati or any track testing, and it's that final few percent that separates it, because whenever you have a Porsche, it feels inexhaustible in its reserves. Porsche is one of the very, very few manufacturers. Porsches are, and we're talking about the sports cars here. They're Caymans, but even like a base Cayman or a base Boxster, you can push as hard as you want in it, and the car will never wilt. Obviously, it will start to slide, understeer or oversteer at a certain point. But in other cars, you might start snatching a wheel of ABS, or you'll start, the steering will maybe get a bit ragged, or the body control will start to fall apart a little bit. You get a bit scrappy wheel spin, whereas a Porsche just seems to lap it up and go, yep, let's get on with it. Fantastic. You want to have a go? I'll have a go with you. And like you said, that ease of the control weights give you confidence. So you're allowed to drive. If you're not a very good driver, it will allow you to drive better than you normally can because you feel confident.
Yep.
But if you are a good driver and want to really push this car, whether it's a Cayman or a 911 turbo, it just feels totally up for it. Like you can drive a car harder and harder and harder, and you go, oh wait, there's still more grip, there's still more steering response.
Yeah.
Even on a track, every year it's like it's. The point of this podcast isn't to be totally sycophantic about Porsche, but rather to explain why these cars are so good. Whenever we go to Performance Car of the Year, the Porsches do more laps than any other car on a racetrack, and they always feel best. One of the key points about last year's Performance Car of the Year, we had everything last year. We threw everything at the Turbo S. We had a Ferrari 488, we had a Lamborghini Huracan, we had a Audi R8 V10 Plus, Nissan GTR. Without naming names, at the end of that week, some very, very impressive cars felt like they could probably do with a decent service. The brakes were starting to creak.
Yep.
There are a couple of creaks and rattles in the cars here and there. Whereas the Turbos felt like it could do another 3 Bugattis.
Yeah, that's the thing with Porsche. Not only do the cars drive in a very natural way and they've got amazing performance, but their build quality in the interior is often second to none. You very, very rarely find like a rattle in a new Porsche or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like most Porsche products, if not all of them, can take a 100-lap beating on a racetrack.
Yeah.
And they often do. You go to the driver training days and they have the same cars there running around all day, and at the end of the day they just use them again the next day after a quick check. It's crazy.
Absolutely. When I last did it with the launch of the just superseded GT3, like not only did each person use the same car all day, but the same car was used for like 6 people. Like the GT3 that we used did something like 120 laps in Queensland summer heat, and needed a new set of tyres at the end of the day, and that's fine. Like it's unbelievable, and the car wasn't even on carbon ceramic brakes. It's still on steel brakes. It's the punishment that Porsche haven't been without their reliability problems over the years, like 996 engines, the intermediate shaft problems, and even the early GT3s, they had those engine fire issues. But it seems like once they do iron those bugs out, and I suppose every manufacturer has those bugs to a certain extent, they are pretty bulletproof. You can only go to any club track day, and from 30 years old to brand new, there's going to be a field of 911s and Caymans there.
Yeah. And every time I drive a 911 or a Boxer or a Cayman on track, I always get this sensation that if I own this car, I would never get bored of it. On
Absolutely,
the track.
yeah.
If you can learn how to drive one of those cars fast and well, then you'll be an absolutely incredible driver, and you could go many track days without ever getting bored.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there's always something new to learn.
Yep.
Whereas some cars we test, you sort of drive them on the track and you go, yeah, I mean, I'm not getting the best out of this car, but you start to feel like you're getting to the car's limit a little bit. They start to get a bit scrappy or whatever. Not a Porsche. I always feel like this car's limits and its ability and its talents are, you know, far greater than mine as a driver.
Well, let's talk about the turbo in that respect, because it's got this reputation of being, I guess, not the boring 911, but it's all-wheel drive, it's turbocharged, it's not a high-rev screamer like the GT3, it hasn't got that motorsport focus. And I guess there's maybe the perception that it is a bit of a bit locked down, but obviously I can't speak for previous 996 and 997 turbos, I haven't driven them, but certainly it's not the case in this car. I mean, this car is a real entertainer still.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of is the clinician of the 911 range. It's not as emotional as the GT3. It is the most luxurious 911 model, Turbo S aside. But it doesn't mean this car's not fun.
No, not at all.
Or not fast. It is absolutely crazy, the performance in this car. Just the power, the braking performance, the grip available. And you can have a lot of fun in it.
Absolutely.
It does feel rear-driven at times as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the big surprise, I guess, when we first drove one of these on track is that how playful it can be. I mean, it was wet at last year's Picotti, so that made it even easier. But the Turbo S, you go, oh, this, super grippy, super powerful, all-wheel drive car. But you just trail the brakes in slowly, use that weight, disadvantage to your advantage, and the thing will just flick into a corner, and then you can ride it out with the throttle. The all-wheel drive system shuffles torque beautifully. It'll let you hold a slide, but also give you traction to pull you out. Like, they haven't just locked it down. They've made it. You can still do massive skids in this car if you want to be a hooligan in it.
Yeah, it feels like it's the engineers have tried to sense what you're trying to do with the car and then help you with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want to drive it nice and clean and straight, then the car will help you do that. But if you want to have a bit of fun with it, the car senses what you're trying to do and it will let you have a bit of fun. It won't try and clamp down like other cars.
That said, neither of us voted for the 911 last year. We both voted for the Ferrari 488, but there's 5 judges. So obviously, three of them voted for the 911. It wins. It had the higher overall score, and I mean, that's the thing. I had the Turbo S, I think, second by half a point to the Ferrari, and I think Dylan, there was only a couple of points in it as well. So why did you vote for the Ferrari over the Porsche, though?
The performance of the 488, particularly its engine performance and just its speed from like 100 to 200 kilometers an hour, is just ridiculous. Absolutely breathtaking, like mind-bending acceleration, and it feels like the acceleration just doesn't end. Like, if you play a game of chicken with that car kind of thing to see when the acceleration will start to taper off, you will be whimpering out before the car does.
That's right.
And my vote wasn't just for the engine performance of that car; it's everything else.
Yeah, it came down to, it was so close. I had to go, if I had one last drive in my life, which of these cars would I take? And that was the 488. It's still, you can play with it in a way you can't necessarily play with this car. On track, you can play with this car but you need a bit of space. You need a bit of balls, I guess, to overcome the grip. Whereas the Ferrari, you can play with it like it's a giant 86 almost with 700 horsepower almost.
Yeah.
So, but when you try and pick holes in this thing, like, road noise is kind of it. 911s have always had a road noise bugbear a little bit. They've got big tyres on them. There's not a huge amount of insulation, and they're still quite light as these things go. This is 1,600 kilos, this car. But apart from road noise, what do you pick? What do you do?
I mean, it depends. It does depend what you want from your high-performance car for circa $400,000. If you want something that's going to attract a lot of attention, that's something that's important to you. You look back at the car when you're walking away and your jaw sort of falls onto the ground. There are other cars available for around that price.
Because it competes with Huracan, R8, McLaren.
Very competitive little pricing segment.
Absolutely. So, does this do the pops and crackles when you put it in sport mode?
It does a little bit, yes.
Okay, because I remember one of the other thing about the turbo is even if it is entertaining to drive, it's still quite clinical. It sounds like a 997s kind of sounded like a big vacuum cleaner almost. They had a lot of induction turbo whoosh, but they don't scream like a GT3 or other manufacturers. But that was really surprised with the Turbo S in that it would do that. The turbo's whooshing in your ears, and you can hear the blow-off noises, and it would go pop, 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 bang, 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 bang off there. So suddenly the car had a personality as well. So going into that event, I was like, it's going to be a great car. These things always are, but will it have that personality? and that's what I've probably got a point or two more for me, is that, you know, you can't just level that at it. It's got that X factor that makes you excited to drive it and go, yeah, this is cool. This isn't just a road destroying rocket. It's got, you know, it's a cool driver's car.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like in isolation, it does have its own personality. For me, it's very mature, sort of professional personality kind of thing. It's not like, you know, boy racery. Like, dare I say, the GT3 is, I wouldn't call it boy racery, but it has a very focused, kind of highly strung feel to it. But it does feel like its own thing in a very sort of mature way. Well, question for you: now that the base Carrera is a turbocharged, how do you find the base Carrera and the 911 Turbo different, and where does this car fit into the 911 range now that the base Carrera is also a turbo?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I asked the Porsche engineer about this because that was my big question. When the 911, it's like, what's the point of a 911 Turbo if all the 911s are turbo? To make it simple, it's basically come down to delivery now. These are the words of Porsche, not necessarily me, but I think you can feel that when you drive this car. They still want this car to have that massive mid-range, like the power curve and torque curve goes bang and then flattens out. So when you hit the throttle, you get thrown back in your seat. Whereas the Carrera, they're really, and I guess the Boxster and Cayman a little bit as well, they're mapping it to have that linear. So you still want to chase revs. You still want to rev it right out to 7,500 RPM. So I guess that's what will differentiate them. It's going to be hard to see whether, I mean, we say this with every car. There we go. You say this with every car, but it's hard to see where they go from here. Because the normal Carreras now are so fast with their turbocharged engine, and this, I mean, the Turbo S at Picotti ran 2.9 seconds to 100 and a 10.7 quarter mile. Like, what do you do? Like, how fast are they going to get? So it's going to be interesting to see how they manage that differentiation of the models, and what they do with this car. Do they just keep throwing power at it? They keep throwing speed at it? Is that its function? Or, will the next one be 2.5 seconds to 100? Will it be hybrid? Who knows? So we don't know the answer at the moment, but it's still a great car, and I think that they are still different in personality to the Carrera compared to this car.
Yeah, that's right. The Carrera feels like you said, they've made a turbo engine behave as naturally aspirated as possible.
Yeah.
Whereas this car does still feel very boosty, and it still has that excitement as it does come on boost that it's just kind of hard to match.
Absolutely. I mean, really, if you want to sum up the performance car thing, I found a couple of things. The fastest car we've ever performance tested is a 911 Turbo S, which was a Picotti lot, and the fastest car we've ever driven around Winton is a 911 GT3. So if you want to know why they're performance car of the year, or, you know, the two standards that we have are both Porsches, and that includes, you know, Lambo with performance test. Now we performance tested the 488. So they are quite amazing machines, and, you know, I don't know if I would buy a 911. I don't think I'd buy a 911 Turbo either, but you have to respect them for what they do. They do an amazing job in terms of engineering I mean, really, and the people who build this car, you can just tell they understand and know what, they're enthusiasts themselves, and they know what makes a good driver's car.
Yeah, and not only have they made a car for hardcore enthusiasts, but it's not like they've made a car for racing drivers either.
No.
There are some performance cars where you feel like it has been built and engineered for someone who is a high-level racing car driver. And if you're just an enthusiast driver, that's probably a little bit too much for you. So that you drive the car, it's hard to feel confident. Not these cars. These cars feel like they're made for enthusiast level of driving. And so when you do drive it, you do feel very comfortable in it, and you are able to use all the performance.
Absolutely. What do you think? Let us know. Have you driven a Porsche? Do you own a Porsche? Do you back what we've said? Have you found that the Porsche thing doesn't work for you? Or do you agree that you've driven a number of models and the Porsche was the pick for you as well? As ever, any issues or cars you'd like us to test, let us know in the comments. You can find us on YouTube, audio on iTunes or Podbean. So we'll see you again with another episode of the Performance Car Podcast very soon.